Ubisoft may well be the worst quadra-A corporation in gaming, managing to drop from its peak during the pandemic when everyone else was getting record game sales, and managing to go from a stock price of €100 to €17 in just over 5 years. How did they pull off this utter disaster, and how do they plan to get out of it? My bad. I mean, how do they plan to make it worse? Now, you likely know about Ubisoft from one of 3 things. The first and most obvious is their leadership covered up widespread abuse and harassment that several of their employees were engaged in for years. This potentially could have been the biggest scandal of this type, but Blizzard always has to steal the ideas of their competitors and make it even better. Number 2 is the absolute proliferation of some of the most obnoxious and hated mechanics in gaming. We're talking about UIs that cover half the screen, arrows pointing to every single thing you need to do so you never have to think beyond go next place, maps stuffed with collectibles rather than interesting places to explore, lore and storytelling completely told through archives, single-player games with MMORPG-style repeatable questing, single-player games stuffed with MMORPG microtransactions, numerous release edition tiers, and day one DLC since the game is never complete on launch, open-world games where you spend more time traveling to next point of interest than engaging with gameplay. Number 3, at some point, being known for making some beloved games like Far Cry 3, the early Assassin's Creed games, Rainbow Six, Rabbids. There was a time when this was one of the studios at the top of gaming, and though it is very hard to believe now, much like Blizzard, this was once a studio that was well regarded too. Ubisoft has potentially 2 huge games coming out soon. We have Assassin's Creed Shadows, the first one set in feudal Japan, which has people very excited to finally play a Japanese samurai, and Star Wars Outlaws, using perhaps the best known IP in the world to create a Han Solo-like story. This is their big strategy. What will save their stock? Catering to the majority of gamers by releasing huge titles that appeal to the most gamers possible. Even they cannot possibly mess up 2 easy slam dunks, but they will try. Shadows has just been marred with controversies, all the same thing we expect. The attack on fans, the lies about why certain elements are included, the Ubisoft lack of polish and open world jank. But now we also have to take away the excitement of a recreation of a historical period as it is replaced with typical Western colonialism. Yasuke, the samurai, was invented by a Western professor whose source was himself. And then the consultant expert for the game in-house was a Western woman whose professional work is about old Buddhist priests banging little boys. This damages the academic world. When academics accept narratives they like without any source beyond, I made it the F up, and that's all before we even get into the game itself. Where Yasuke, whatever he was, he would not have permission to go about crushing the skulls of peasants or guardsmen, disrespecting tradition, as is seen by the disrespectful way he moves through the torii gates, or even to travel the country on a whim. At the time, there were a handful of Dutch traders and Jesuits with permission to enter Japan, and even they were restricted in travel and under heavy surveillance. And even if he was given the honorary title of samurai, this is someone who would never get away with anything shown in the game. He is quite easily the most identifiable person in the country. His heat from any crime would just never go down, because the peasants spotting him doing crimes are going to say, the only guy like this in the country is butchering people in the street. Perhaps most tellingly is a complete lack of interest from the culture these developers are appropriating to make their product. There's a messaging problem here. When this was first announced, Ubisoft had journalists parrot the headline, "The legendary real samurai Yasuke." However, the discourse would soon change to, "It is fictional, stop expecting realism." Yet Assassin's Creed is known for doing a fairly good job of getting settings right. Sure, there's supernatural elements, but when you start a promo campaign with, "This is based on real life," and move to, "It is fiction, everyone who expected this to be based on real life is a bigot," gamers see what you are doing, and they know you are not being authentic. And Shadows was compared by many to 2 games in particular. On one extreme, Ghost of Tsushima, which did such a great job of being authentic it was praised by natives to the area the game takes place, which is completely opposite the reaction Japan has had to Shadows. On the other extreme, Nioh, which also has a foreigner in Japan during the feudal period, albeit one with considerably more known about him. But there was also never any pretense that Nioh was about realism. It was you fighting undead and demons using magic and ninjutsu. Shadows tried to go from authentic and historical to pure fiction as lies the studio and the journalist pets made were unveiled. And when you get caught lying and try to fix it with more lies, you cannot pretend to be shocked that people do not trust you. Star Wars Outlaws is their other huge release this year. The takedown animations for Star Wars Outlaws is one of the funniest things ever. There's one where she goes to grab a guy, he drops his gun before contact is even made, lets her gently turn him towards her, stands there for a moment while she winds up a punch so telegraphed you could see it from the forest moon of Endor. She once again breaks her bare hand on a helmet. He softly slumps to the ground as she easily handles the weight of a now dead guy twice her size. Accordingly, Ubisoft paid and bribed influencers with trips to Disneyland, vacations, etc. for reviews for Outlaws and Assassin's Creed, and the defense being used to counter this is not that they didn't do it, but it is not a big deal. We are always getting these sorts of bribes for our reviews from big companies. If you ever wonder why journo sites give 8s and 9s to so many annual release slop games full of bugs, when they review a AA or indie game, they nuke it from orbit, this is why. Interesting, is it not? Even small kickbacks a decade ago would have gotten major pushback, but now it is just the norm, so nobody even cares. Just like heavy monetization, games that are incomplete with paid day one DLC, and months of bug fixes on release, developers waging war on social media against gamers and broken games that take 8+ years to make, so too are lavish trips, bribery, and favors for journalists who advertise and run defense for massive game corporations is so normalized it does not even register today. So why is Outlaws really getting such glowing reviews from journalists? Do they actually enjoy it? Or is it a result of bribes, trips to Disneyland, access journalism, an unwillingness to anger not only Ubisoft, but potentially Disney too? Is it because Ubisoft paid the SBI extortion fees that were alleged in the targeted harassment campaign, which journalists hammered Wukong with after Wukong refused to pay consultants potentially $7 million and also refused to force Western ideology into the game? Was it that they likely get grants from the government of certain Western countries, as many of these games obtain huge grants, as well as favorable loans from massive lending corporations, as long as they check off some boxes and have a high enough ESG score? Does it even matter how well the games do? Because the normal flow of journalism, which should be about integrity and honesty, is completely disrupted. And the normal flow of capitalism with gaming companies, which is you make money when you make a product people want to buy, is also disrupted since the companies have an endless supply of taxpayer money the government provides for them, whether their game does well or poorly. Now, much as it might seem I'm saying these games will fail, no, these are both going to be massive games. They have huge pre-built audiences. Consider something like Cyberpunk. He got slammed after release, sure, but this was the maker of the amazing Witcher 3, and journalists heap praise upon the game, and as broken as it was, it still managed to have one of the best opening week sales of any game ever. Star Wars is absolutely massive, and so is Assassin's Creed. There's really no reason to believe these games will do poorly. Now, if you do end up playing it, though, Star Wars Outlaws is running a skin promo with Disney, where if you sign up for Disney Plus, you will get a cosmetic for the little lizard monkey thing. Do keep in mind, though, that if you sign up for Disney Plus, they are permitted to execute you and your family whenever they want to. Before you go buy Outlaws, for some reason, it has received a lot of praise for the way it does its 1 minute long loading screens. Yes, 1 minute long loading screens. For some reason, this is praiseworthy. That when you zone into a new planet, it sends you through a cutscene to go through clouds to try and hide the fact that it is a load screen. And people are acting like this is something new and amazing. Now, I can't say precisely when this became a thing, but the most memorable version of this is nearly 2 decades old, from a game called Mass Effect. And people still mock the elevator load screens in that game. When most games have loads under 5 seconds now, trying to act like a 1 minute load is impressive seems absolutely crazy. And you'll be doing this possibly hundreds of times, meaning you can easily spend an hour and a half or more looking at this load screen over the course of playing this game. So, before you buy, sit there for a minute, and if you can't make it through just once, maybe rethink the purchase.